Hi, this is Jeremy Moskowitz, and in this video we're going to talk about best practices with regards to security and PolicyPak Least Privilege Manager. Now, to set the stage, PolicyPak Least Privilege Manager is, like I say, is a sharp scalpel, and it will do exactly what you tell it to do. And because of that, you should be always thinking about how to give your users the least amount of privileges possible. Now, we're going to talk about that in excruciating detail, but I kind of want to set the stage by using a typical application like Adobe Acrobat Reader here, just to show you something that you may not even know you could do. Now, before we even go into that, I also want to show you something you could do in Task Manager. If you click on the Details tab in Task Manager, you can see your running applications and if they're elevated or not. Now, I don't have Least Privilege Manager elevating this application right now, and as such, it says elevated. No. Okay, great. Now, some applications like Acrobat Reader and a lot of other applications enable you to go to places like My Computer, Browse, and then you can go to things like C, Windows, System 32. And if you type star here to get all the items and then zip on down to the command prompt, okay, you could right click and open. Now, remember, you're not elevated, so running a command prompt from this file open window within Adobe Reader, what's that going to do? That's going to just create a standard command prompt. If you were to try to right click run as admin, you're going to get UAC credentials. This is fine. Again, no PolicyPak involved at this stage. What I want to show you next, however, is if you were to go ahead and try to elevate an application that has a file open dialog like this. So I'm going to create a new executable policy. I'm going to create a simple rule. I'm just going to use path for now. Most of the talk we're going to be talking about a little later is here around these settings, apply to child processes and these other little guys. Hang tight, that's going to be the main focus of our talk. But I'm just to get it started here, I'm going to add an application. I'll just use star acro star.exe. So now I'm going to just say anything called acro reader or whatever, that's going to be elevated, run with elevated privileges, and we're off to the races. Let's do that exact same thing we did earlier. So I'm going to run GP update here. Okay, and then after this is done, I'm going to rerun Acrobat Reader, and what we should see is that Acrobat Reader is now elevated because of Least Privilege Manager. And then let's do that exact same test again. Let's see what we get this time. So we go run Acrobat Reader, go to Open. Actually, sorry, before we do that, here we go. We can see Acro Reader is, in fact, elevated. If we were to go to My Computer, Browse, and go to C, Windows, System 32, and we'll go type star again, go back to the command prompt, okay, or any other application. I'm just using the command prompt as an example here. Right-click and open. Now remember, we're running elevated, and when we click open, what's going to happen? Oh my goodness, hey look, it's set as administrator command prompt, which enables you to do things like net start and stop. If I want to do like net stop Windows audio, this is something that could only be done if you're an admin. So this command prompt is running with admin rights. Now, if you're having a little panic attack, don't have a panic attack. The ability to change this behavior has always been in PolicyPak the entire time. All you need to do is when you click on the condition here, you can just say, hey, don't apply to child processes. Okay? When you unselect apply to child processes, what happens next automatically, let me go back to GP update here. Okay? Now what we're saying is any processes that get launched from that initial process, that initial parent process, is going to not inherit those rights. Okay, so let's do this exact same demo again. All right, go back to Acrobat Reader. Acrobat Reader itself is in fact elevated, as you can see here. We'll go to File Open, go to My Computer, Browse, see Windows, System 32, and go back to Command Prompt here. All right, so the application itself is still elevated. Okay, here we go, command prompt. All right, application itself is still elevated, but now if we were to try to go to right click and go to open, what do we get? Standard command prompt. If you try to do net start or stop, net stop, for instance, Windows time, you will not be allowed to do that because you're not running with admin rights. So you've had this ability to block applications from spawning other processes right there. So it's on by default. And why do we have it on by default? Why do we enable the ability to spawn other processes as admin by default? Because there are times in applications, even Acrobat Reader actually is a pretty good example, when you go to help check for updates, well, how is that process going to run? How is check for updates going to run from this parent process? If you go to check for updates and it's being told that it can't do it in an elevated fashion, well, that's going to fail. So our default behavior, if we go back here, as you saw earlier, is to set it such that it will apply to child processes. Okay, so it will automatically apply to child processes. Now, again, at any point in time, you can just uncheck that, provided your application is suitable to do so. Now, there are a couple other extra security mechanisms that are available to you if you want to turn the different thumb screws. So even though you're going to, by default, apply to child processes, you can also make some choices about when things will not be able to inherit the permissions. Okay, so for instance, don't apply to unsigned executables. Well, let's try that one. What's an unsigned executable? An unsigned executable, for instance, on my desktop here, would be this guy. This program called CamPlay. This program called CamPlay has no digital signature, and you would know that because it would have a digital signatures tab, unlike Procmon, which does have a digital signatures tab. So therefore, CamPlay is not digitally signed. So let me go ahead and run GP update, and let me try to attempt now that I've made that settings change in Group Policy and PolicyPak Least Privilege Manager, to try to run CamPlay Elevated. So again, we're going to use the trusty details tab here. Let me go ahead and run Adobe Reader, and we can see that it's running elevated. Go to Open and My Computer and Browse, and go to C, Windows, System 32, and go back to actually, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to go back to the desktop. Haha. And then here's CamPlay. Right-click and try to open it. Now, if it were digitally signed, it would run elevated. But you see, it's not digitally signed, so it's not running elevated. If I were to try to run it, say as administrator, okay, it still will not run elevated. Okay, it's still not running elevated. But an application that is digitally signed, for instance, Procmon, okay, right-click and open. What's going to happen? Well, it's running elevated. Procmon is running elevated automatically. Let's see if we can find it here. Find Procmon in the list. Yep, there we go. Procmon is running elevated because what we told Least Privilege Manager to do was only do the prevention of passing permissions to unsigned executables. So what I think we should do next is take this to the next level and talk about the idea of untrusted executables and executables signed by other publishers. Let's start with don't apply executables signed by other publishers. What does that mean? Well, as you might imagine, Acrobat Reader is signed by Adobe, and Process Monitor is a Microsoft tool and signed by Microsoft. So now what we're doing is we're saying, let's rerun command prompt here. Okay, and run GP update. So now what we're saying is, hey, if you start off life in Acrobat Reader and you try to jump the fence over to a different publisher altogether, then block that action. Let's go ahead and just see it work, and then we'll talk through that a little bit more. So let's go back to Adobe Reader here, open My Computer, browse, and again on my desktop here. That there we go. And now Process Monitor signed by Microsoft. Whoops. Right click and open. What are we going to get? We are not going to be able to make the jump to running with admin rights. Same thing if I were to try to right click again and run as administrator. We're blocking that. Okay, so why would you want to leave? Why would you maybe need to have this on or need this off? Well, it's possible that Acrobat Reader maybe calls something else by the same publisher in order to get its job done. So in that way, you may want to apply it to executables signed by the same publisher, which is the default behavior, right? Like I said before, if Acrobat Reader is trying to do its own kind of updates or something like that, you may want to ensure that it's always going to be able to do that, but you don't want to apply to executables signed by other publishers. All right. Next up on the docket here is don't apply to unrelated executables. That means not in the same folder or recursive, and there's a little tooltip here to help you remember that. So for instance, if I don't apply to unrelated executables here, you're going to see basically the exact same thing. Here's not the demo will not be any different. Okay, but what we're saying here is, hey, you started the process off in Acrobat Reader land. You're trying to jump to a different folder, okay, like the desktop, and trying to run an application from there. What are we going to do? We're going to block that from occurring. So let's go ahead and try that one out. If we go to Open and go to My Computer, Browse, go back to the desktop and show everything on the desktop here, we can then try to rerun Procmon and open. And what's going to happen? It's going to be blocked. Okay, so and other processes that we start are not going to be running with admin rights, even if they run at all. Okay, they're just going to be running with standard rights. Okay, the last one on the docket is a little bit more advanced, which is why I'm saving it for last. The idea about this last guy here, don't apply to untrusted executables here. Its job is to help you look at the file owner, okay, and if it's not on the regular secure run list, which is to say trusted installer, a local admin, or somebody who's on the secure run list when secure run is on, then it's not going to let it run with admin rights. Okay, so also a pretty good idea. So long story short, it is definitely going to be your best case to have all of these checked. Well, actually, your best and most secure would be to never try to apply to child processes. That is actually your most secure, because in this way, there's no other way for that application to sort of elevate into foreign applications. But again, if this is required, you may try to turn the additional thumb screws on purpose to then see if that application can be contained enough such that it is within control and doesn't kind of need to jump out to try to apply to things like unsigned executables, untrusted applications, executables signed by other publishers, or unrelated executables. Okay, so with that in mind, this is your security lecture of the day. I hope this helps you out, and therefore you're using Least Privilege Manager to do that job, to do the least amount of privileges possible. So again, whenever possible, uncheck apply to child processes, but if you do need to apply to child processes, at least you have these extra thumb screws to turn such that your users can't jump out and run additional processes that you do not want elevated. All right, hope this helps you out. Thank you very much, and talk to you soon.